Okay, today is June 18th, 2011. My name's Mary Larson, and I'm here with Dorothy Jameson here in Stillwater where she's visiting. And I was wondering if you could take just a moment at the beginning and tell us a little bit about when and where you were born.
When I was born?
When you were born and where.
Well, okay. As my mother refreshes my mind, I was born in the oldest house in the Panhandle of Oklahoma. It was an old rock house. Of course, everything was rock out there, the corrals and fences and everything, because there wasn't any trees other than cottonwood, and they didn't last very long. So this was the old ZH cattle ranch, and it was a long 3-room, one room right after another, and of course there was no running water, no electricity, and women's work was really hard. And I just look back on the days and the things that my mother did then, that I just don't know whether the people today could stand up under it or not. Mm-hmm. But anyway, we're a pretty rugged bunch. So I lived there till I was 3, and then my 2 brothers were ready to go to school. Mother had taught the oldest one at home, homeschooled him the first year, and so then we moved to Boise City and lived there till I was 5. And then we moved out on the ranch, built a house and moved out there, and I know I'm not doing a very good job.
Oh, no, that's one.
And so then it was time for school to start, and my dad said, do we even have a teacher at the schoolhouse? And nobody had hired a teacher, nobody had done anything. So there was a young man from Boise City whose dad was a county agent, had just graduated from college and was getting ready to go to law school, and my dad talked him into teaching that year so that we could have a school teacher. Well, he got ready, and so he could stay with our house, which he did, and he got ready to go to school the first day, and he asked my mother, said, well, isn't Dorothy going to go? And she said, no, she isn't old enough. Oh, she is old enough, said, send her. So I went to school at 5, and I was really surprised at the number of students that were there. When we got there, I felt like, well, we were late, because there must have been 15 or 16 students. It was grades 1 through 8. So school went along real fine, and I was about myself. I was the only left-handed one in my family, and everybody teased me about it. So I ended up wondering what I should do, because I didn't like to be teased. No child likes to be teased. Mm-hmm. So I remembered the directions. I knew my directions, north, south, east, and west. And I noticed that everybody picked their pencil up in their south hand. The desk faced the east. So I broke myself to write right-handed.
Well, you mentioned that you had brothers. Did you just have brothers, or did you have any sisters?
No, 2 brothers.
Okay. Were they both older then?
Yes.
Okay.
But they were very close together. We were like, one time we were 1, 2, 3, and 4.
So all just right in a stair step.
Right.
Right. Now, before we go on with school too much further, could we talk a little bit about the history of the ranch? Because you mentioned a few things to me earlier that I think we'd like to.
Well, I wish I really knew more about it and had thought about it more. I could have done a little research, but the way I understand it was, with it being no man's land, they opened it up for settlement, and it was being divided up into homesteads, 160 acres, and the cattlemen were running the whole area, large section after section, and they couldn't make any money if they were going to have to do something like that and put up a bunch of fences. So they put it up for sale and for homesteading. And my grandfather, who came from Oklahoma, New Mexico, and he had sheep and had lots of Mexicans. So he brought sheep and Mexicans and cattle to the ranch, and the different ones homesteaded. And I have often thought, ever little pile of rocks that was a corral or a fence. That was the Montoya place. And then there was another one, was another Mexican place. They were all named after the Mexicans that homesteaded at that area. So then it was strictly used for grazing, and I really don't know, the small child, too much about irrigation project my dad and his two brothers started on the Cimarron River, but it didn't pan out to be a great irrigation project to raise the feed that they needed. But there was an interesting thing to me that I had one of my uncles, two of the uncles. My dad had two brothers, and both of them went to college, but Dad didn't. And one of them decided that he was going to make soapweed silage. Now, that is, most of you know what a soapweed is. It's bare grass. They have different names for it, yucca and so forth. And during the Dust Bowl, there wasn't anything for the cattle to eat but soapweeds, anything green. And Dad had a machine that my uncle had bought to chop up and make silage out of, and it cut those spines about inch and a half or 2 inches long. And so he fed those and cake the year round. And he had some Mexicans that would go out, and you can cut one of those yucca plants out right under the ground real easy with a shovel. You just get under the ground, it cuts easy. And he'd pile up big piles, and then they just pulled this soapweed grinder around, and it ran off a pulley belt on a tractor, and it would cut it up. Well, this became very popular with all the ranchers up and down the river during the Dust Bowl, because they didn't have anything to feed their cows either. So they would cut up the soapweeds and have them piled up, and they just pulled this machine up one side of the river and down the other, and a lot of fellas got to use it, which was a blessing for everybody. But as time went on, and the government came in 1935 with the Soil Conservation Service, and was able to talk people into putting some of this grassland into banks and not farm it, not till it, not do anything. That's what happened back in 1929 when they was having a depression on the East Coast. They were selling wheat at a high market out here and raising lots of it, but they had to, then it got dry and it was just blown away. There was no vegetation to hold it. So they planted trees and they planted vegetation and did everything. And then back in the early 40s, there was rains came. The ground was fertile, soil was fertile, and so if we just get water on it, so then with the rains coming and everything, they were able to get back into the raising of grain and pasture and so forth.
Did they ever patent that machine for the soapweed that ground up the soapweed for silage, or?
No, it was interesting. Just recently, we have, I live down at Sulphur now, and Bill Chitwood, who was a big dairy man, moved down there from Lake Arcadia. The government came in and bought their dairy, and that's where Lake Arcadia is now. But, he wanted to go out and see the Black Mason where I grew up, and we went out there last fall. And I was showing him that. He said, well, that's just about the same thing we have. We call it a silage grinder. So somebody else had already patented it or something, but anyway, that's how it got started around our place.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you know when your family first purchased the ranch? I mean, was it, or which generation of your family?
It was my grandfather.
Okay.
And it had been in I would say 1893, but I may be mistaken. I think I am. But
how big was the ranch when you were growing up?
Well, out there you have a lot of state land, and I cannot explain to you what certain section was set aside for state land, and you have to lease that from the state. But what my dad had with deeded land and state land was about 22,000 acres.
Wow.
But see, it takes about 40 acres or 45 acres for each cow and calf unit in a place like that. So then, would you like to hear some about the Dust Bowl?
Oh, certainly.
Oh my, that was something else. The wind blew continuously for, I don't know, just day after day after day, and most of the time it blew out of the southwest. And it blew gravel, it'd sting your legs, and most of the time girls then didn't wear jeans, we wore dresses. And it would just sting our legs and so forth. And a car driving between Guyman and Boise City was one of those hard winds. The sand, it just looked like it had been sandblasted. Paint would just been removed. But it was really, really dusty. And a lot of people said they got dust pneumonia. I don't know whether they really had dust pneumonia or not. I just can't say because I wasn't a doctor, and none of our family was bothered with it. But I do know that you could not keep the dust out of the house. And with the weather the way it was, a lot of people would put up wet curtains, sheets and stuff over windows and doors to keep the dust out. Well, that was okay, but my two brothers and I went to high school in Boise City, and we lived in a little two-room house, and we had those green roller shades, and you'd pull them down, and then we'd put a chair back against them to keep it from blowing out. And then about once a week, we'd come along with our fire shovel and fire bucket, ash bucket, and dig out all that. Oh, it would be the most full of dust you could find, it just silt.
Mm-hmm.
And but that's the way we cleaned house. And,
so that worked pretty well, though, to keep it out of the rest of the house.
Yeah. And a lot of people use wide paper sticky tape that came down and just taped the windows and doors and everything, that weren't going to be open, closed. And that kept out a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
But there was no way of keeping out a lot of it. It just was going to get in.
Well, and in the summer, too, especially when it's so hot, you want a little bit of a breeze if you can get it. How did you deal with that, trying to keep the dust out but the air in?
Yeah. Well, most of us learned not to be too good a housekeeper because it was really hard to keep the dust out.
Mm-hmm.
But then as we grew older and the rain started coming, things got better, and people kind of forgot about the Dust Bowl till all of a sudden it's coming back. You're seeing more things about the Dust Bowl, and I think there's even a jazz band of some kind calls themselves the Dust Bowl now down in southern Oklahoma. But the thing about it was that it made me appreciate life. I tell you, I cannot throw anything away. My children can tell you that. If they can't find it, they can go up in my attic and find it. But you just don't throw things away when you need them and you don't have money to buy them, and nobody did. I went to a high school reunion one year, several years after we graduated from even college, and this friend of mine named Nellie Wells said, we were driving around reminiscing about high school days, and she said, Dorothy, you were poor, but we were poor, poor, poor. And I said, well, I know that, Nellie, and that's the reason we always went after basketball practice over to my house and ate toast and drank milk, because I knew you didn't have it at home. And her dad had died. He was a farmer southeast of Boise City in the Griggs community, and had died with I don't know whether it was pneumonia or what, but left a lady with 6 small children. And she moved to town and worked as a waitress. Well, she wasn't getting too good of wages in Boise City during the Dust Bowl. But her kids all graduated, they did well, and several years later, one of them was written up as one of the largest wheat farmers in the Panhandle of Texas. So, see, if you just stick with it, it's kind of the story of Job in the Bible.
Mm-hmm. Well, what's your earliest memory of the Dust Bowl when you were, your youngest memory? Are there any specific things you remember from really early on?
Well, they put through a railroad, Santa Fe Railroad, from Boise City to La Junta, Colorado. Well, to Lamar rather, but it joined up with the other at Lamar. And they had a train excursion train, the first train that ran, and we all went on it. It was the worst day you could have had as far as dust. You couldn't even see out the windows, couldn't see things. But yet it was packed with people. People all had to ride that train. But one of the scariest things was probably when I was, probably 12, or maybe not that old. I was visiting my grandmother, and she kind of lived in a ranch house, and it was in a little valley, and you weren't aware of clouds coming in. Well, this was Palm Sunday, and it had been a beautiful day, and people had picnics and what all, and all of a sudden it just turned dark, and she didn't have electricity, and she had to hunt for the matches and the light and lamp to light it and everything. And then when finally she got it lit, you could just see that tiny, tiny flame. Well, that was what the first black duster they had. And you can read books telling about the birds going ahead of the dust storm. Well, a year or two later then, on April the 1st, my brother and I had borrowed the pickup from Dad to have an all-school picnic. And we started home. We saw this big cloud. Now, the black dusters came from the northeast. Most of the dust storms came from the southwest. But we started home, and we ran into that cloud. Well, it just hit you, and then within seconds, it was total darkness. It was like you would go into a closet and shut the door, and not a bit of light would get in, And that was how dark it was, not for a very long time. But that's the way it was. We were there sitting there in the pickup. He had to stop, and we were sitting there in the pickup together talking, but couldn't see each other. And then pretty soon, as the dust kind of lifted, and kind of like a fog lifting, and we tried to start the car, and it had built up static electricity. So then we had to find a wire to get rid of that. And then we lost the wire, and finally somebody came by and took us back to Boise City. We stayed till the next day. But it's things like that really, and it bothered the animals too. The birds when a storm like that would come up, they would just go wild. They'd just fly and everybody had it a little bit different. But I think those two black dust storms were the most scary things when it's total darkness. And but that's about.
Well, how did the cattle and sheep do through those? Did they get away?
They didn't do well. Most of the ranchers had hospital herds where they had to tail up the animal to get up to eat next morning. But anyway, the government did help them a little bit. They paid $1 an animal, and they took the animal usually out behind a hill somewhere and had a big hole and just did away with them. They were too poor and skinny to eat. But they survived just barely. But we were kind of fortunate on our ranch. There were spring-fed creeks, and they never did go dry. They got low, and they quit running, but there was water in those creek holes. There had a little spring. And then at our house, we had 2 windmills, and the wind blew enough. There was water there, and it pumped, and those things, and had these 2 big redwood tanks that hold about 22,000 gallons. We'd water the garden and the orchard, and when you have your chickens and stuff, we didn't feel the drought and the depression like a lot of people did. And that's the grapes of wrath people that really loaded up and lost everything when they went to California.
Well, how many people, I guess that brings back, how many people from your neighborhood or the surrounding ranches or even Boise City, how many people did you know who left?
Well, I thought maybe that example of just 6 kids in a school in 35 would show you there was only 3 families that had children up and down the river.
Right.
Then, it should be going to school at the Garrett School. So there were a lot of them left.
Mm-hmm.
And then as a child, you don't pay too much attention to what's going on around you like you should. But I knew that a lot of people did go, and then a lot of them, when they got out there, couldn't find work, and it was really made it kind of worse.
Mm-hmm. But none of your good friends or relatives left. Okay. Just speaking of the Garrett School, since we haven't talked about that too much on the recording, you'd mentioned that when you were going to elementary school, I mean, it was a one-room schoolhouse that used to be the post office.
Yes.
I understand.
And a lady by the name of Martha Garrett was the first postmistress. And it was a post office for about 21 years. But then it was closed, and I don't know how long it was closed before it was opened up as a school. But it was always called the Garrett. And that kind of was known as the Garrett community because there is a Garrett cemetery out on the ranch where, well, all of my relatives and everybody like that that's up down the river have been buried there. And now several people are asked to be buried there that come in off of the flats out around Boy City. So.
Okay. And you said it started out when you first went to the school and, you know, when you were younger, when you were starting school, that there were a number of people there. How many years do you think it took for that population to dwindle down?
Well, several of them had several children. Mm-hmm. Now, I remember there was one family, the Gillises. They were old-timers there, and everything, and his children lived there. One daughter married a man by the name of Quackenbush, and they had several children. And Esther Quackenbush was my good friend. She was the one I had in my class. Till I don't know when they moved away, because it got to be I was the only one in my class. And right now, I am the only living alumni of the Garrett School. Everybody else that ever went through the Garrett School and died, including my brothers and everybody else. So,
did it close after you and your brothers left for high school? Do you know?
Soon thereafter. Soon thereafter, yes. Yeah.
Because if you were the youngest of that group, about the time they got through.
Because it wasn't long then until they started running school buses out into the rural areas. The school buses didn't run then.
And when you were going to high school, the school buses weren't running out to the ranch. And that's, you said you and your brothers moved into town.
Yeah, right.
So
that was an experience. And it was good for us to learn to take care of ourselves and fix food and so forth. I don't regret it a minute.
Did that work out pretty well for the most part, do you think?
Oh, yeah. I don't know how we'd gotten an education at that stage of the game if it hadn't been that way, because the first year, my oldest brother worked did board and room at a family that had a grocery store. And he would stock groceries after school and so forth and everything, and just lived in their house for room and board. They didn't have any children. And then the next year, my dad got this little two-roomed house. It was just a block from school. Of course, there was no school cafeteria or anything. And they went to school. Then the next year, we just put a double bed in and put a single bed in the bedroom, and we just got along fine. We never fussed until we went home.
Well, you were all in it together.
Yeah, right. Mother said, I don't understand how you can get along so well at town, and I come home and fuss.
Well, when you were in high school, what were your favorite subjects?
Oh, my favorite subject was basketball. Lord, I lived and ate basketball. I loved it and everything, and athletics have been my cup of tea all my life. If I'd have been a boy, I'd have been a football player. So, we had a good basketball team. The year I was a senior, we went to the state. We didn't win, but we got close to winning. We got in the semifinals, and I made All-State then, and that was when all the towns in the state, the big schools didn't have basketball. but the little school, all the smaller schools had basketball. And so they were all in one class. You know, now you have A, B, 2A, 3A, 4A, 6A. But then it was just all one thing. But
Now,
it was fun.
were there other sports available for girls at the time? Or?
No, or softball.
Softball.
We played softball, but we didn't, we just played different people. The elementary school, the schools around, there were several. There was Plainview, and there was Keys, and there was Felt, that were in Cimarron County, and we just have county tournaments, you know, for that.
Were there any teachers who had a big influence on you in high school?
Well, probably my basketball coach. He was just a dear person. He wasn't married at the time, and of course a bunch of girls had left to embarrass him, you know how that was. But then when I went to Panhandle to school, he and the music teacher, Boy City, decided to get married, and they came and asked me to be in their wedding. So I thought
that's
that was
wonderful.
nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned that after high school you went to Panhandle State,
Yes,
and you did that for 2 years.
right.
And what were you majoring in there before you transferred?
Well, when I went to Panhandle State, I talked to the president and asked him if he, we were talking about, and I wanted to be a physical education major. He said, well, Dorothy, Ed Morrison was the president, and he said, you just won't be able to get a job other than going into a big city, because the smaller schools use men as social study teachers and use them as coaches. So I'd always been interested in home economics because of an aunt that was, and so I just went that way.
Okay, yeah, because I was wondering what influenced you,
Yeah.
you know, in that direction.
And it was interesting. The homemaking teacher that I had at Panhandle was head of the department at Panhandle. She basically taught foods, and she had a senior student who taught clothing out there because she didn't like to teach the clothing, but in a smaller school you did the best you could. So, and her name was Mary Leidick. I want to mention that here because she came to OSU and was head of the foods department. And I have been told that in the delicacy at the medical center here, the little sandwich bar, they still use, she did a lot of volunteer work at this hospital, that they still use her recipe for chicken salad and pimento cheese for the sandwiches there in that little delicacy. So I think that's kind of nice to know.
Well, after 2 years, you said you transferred to what would have been Oklahoma A&M at the time.
Yeah.
Was that hard to get that far away from home at that point, or?
Well, it didn't bother me, you know. You know, we went home at Christmas. I guess we went home at Thanksgiving. I don't remember because everybody didn't have a car like they do now. But
And did you get to play basketball at Panhandle State? I
Well-
forgot to ask about that.
I played with the boys.
Oh, well, good for you.
They didn't. There weren't a bunch of girls, you know. But we'd go down Sunday afternoon or Saturday afternoon to the gym and play, you know, and it was fun.
So you kept in fighting shape for
Right.
So once you got to Stillwater, though, were you able to play basketball again?
Yes, I played intramural.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I could tell you kind of a story, but you might think I was bragging.
No, please do tell us.
But anyway,
It's not bragging if we ask.
Okay. I was a home economics major, but I did well. We had intramurals and did well in everything, especially basketball. I've had very few on my team that could even dribble the ball, but that didn't matter. If they could get me the basket, I could usually make it, you know, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of bragging. But anyway, my senior year, the Mrs. Colvin and a bunch of the athletic teachers, girls, athletic teachers, pick an outstanding senior girl. So in 1940, and put it on name on a plaque. And in my senior year, my name was on the plaque in 1944.
Wow.
So one time when I was up visiting my children when they were in school, after they built the Colvin Center, I called her and visited her, and she said, "Dorothy, I want to show you the center." And I said, "Well, I'm going to meet the kids over there." And I said, they'll show me. She said, "No, I have keys that unlock doors that they can't get behind." So we went over there. We had a nice time. They've remodeled it so many times now that I wouldn't even recognize it.
Well, we'll have to go see your plaque and take a picture that will go with the oral history.
Yeah, I don't think it. I don't know whether you could ever find it or not.
Oh.
Because she said they had a lot of trouble deciding what to bring for a certain era, and that was what they chose kind of for that period. But the last time I was there, I didn't see it, but that doesn't mean it's not there. My eyes are not what they used to be.
Well, when you were at Oklahoma A&M, did you have any particular teachers that made a big impression? You mentioned Mary Leidick at Panhandle, who ended up at OSU.
Yeah. Well, I guess Dean Stout made a big impression on me, and Bernadine Brock was her secretary at the time. I don't know whether you'd ever heard of her or not. Bernadine. But some of those people, they kept you on the right track, and when you stayed busy. And when I got an invitation to be on, I can't think now, well, one of the top 10 in the class, but can't think of the name of the organization. That boys did it now. It was just girls then. And I got an invitation to be in it, and I didn't even know what they were talking about. But anyway, I joined and enjoyed it,
And I understand you were a member of a sorority?
I was a member of the Chi Omega sorority, and I thoroughly enjoyed that immensely.
Did you live in the sorority
Yes.
house when you did?
By the time I got ready to come to college, things had looked up on the ranch and everything, and I asked my dad. I didn't know a thing about sorority life, except what I read in magazines and books. And so some of the teachers, one of the teachers I had, head of the English department out there, had been a Chi Omega from OSU at A&M. And she asked me if I was going through Rush, and so she explained it to me kind of. And so Dad said he didn't care, so I did, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It gave me a nice home away from home, and I won't say I made better friends there than I made otherwise, but one of the ladies, you may know, Catherine McCullum, was a Chi Omega with me. And then another friend I still have here is Bonnie Smith, whom she was an independent. She didn't go for sororities, but we all played ball together, and we had a softball team that played the Waves. During World War II, the Waves came in and were stationed there.
Well, in fact, we interviewed someone who was with the Waves not all that long ago, and she talked about some of that. Now, when you were there with taking home ec, did they have? I think it was called the Adams House.
Well, when that the home management house.
Right, it was the home management house,
yeah.
and I was thinking it had another name, but it might.
I think they did. There were two houses.
Okay.
Two home management houses, and I think each one of them had a separate name. Yes,
Okay.
they did.
And what did that entail when you were there?
Well, there were 8 girls that lived in the house at the same time, and you were cook for a week, you were laundry for a week, you were housekeeper for a week, you took care of the baby for a week. There were 8 jobs that you did that week, and then it would switch, and you'd do something else. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. But Miss Lisk was my home management teacher, and I loved her. She was encouraging all the time. And
Well, it sounds like you probably would have had too busy a schedule at this point to do anything else, but were you involved in anything else while you were in college?
College. Well, just organizations.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Home Economics Club and different things like that. Off the top of my head now, I can't remember everything there was in. Have to get the Redskin out to look.
Mm-hmm. Now, you graduated in 1944?
Yes.
Okay. What did you do after graduation?
Well, I got my first job in Tucumcari, New Mexico in the Extension Service.
Okay. And what were you doing with the Extension Service?
Well, are you familiar with the Extension Service? Okay.
I'm a farm kid.
Okay, well, good. Well, I did 4-H work, and I did the women's clubs and everything. And there was a man that had lost his wife fairly recently, and we had a lot of teenagers there in Tucumcari, and they rode horses and so forth. And so he was a square dance caller, so he wanted to teach them square dancing. So we did square dancing, and then they put it on their horses and took it to the state fair. And that was a big thing, to go. I carried the American flag.
That would be no small trick.
Huh?
That would be no small trick.
No. It was they practiced and practiced, and they did a good job. And it was nice. And
okay, so you worked for the extension, for the extension service for a while.
Yeah, and then I got married.
Okay.
Roger went overseas, and then I went home to just help my mother. She'd had surgery, and so then when he got back, we moved to Davis.
Okay. Well, how did you meet? Did you meet in college?
Yes. He never did think that education was very important, but his mother kept pushing him and so forth. But he had some good friends from Tulsa. He was a Tulsa boy.
Okay.
That were there, and he would come to the Chi Mega house and visit them and everything.
Okay, so that's how you ran into it. So
Yeah.
did you get married before he went overseas?
Yes.
Okay, so what year was that?
Well, it was in 45.
45, okay. And what did you do when he got back?
Well, we packed up and came down to Davis
Okay,
and started building what we have now.
okay. And how did you choose that area down around Davis and Salta?
Well, his dad was an attorney, and he, before I came, he had gone into partnerships with another attorney in Davis, in Sulphur, I should say, Sulphur, and John Powell, who then later was appointed by Turner to the Criminal Court of Appeals here in Oklahoma. So that's how we got started.
Okay. And how, can you tell us a little bit about that ranch as well?
Well, yes, it's been kind of interesting. In the beginning, I had a few head of cattle, about 20 head of heifers that we moved down there. It kind of started a little herd, and we're going along pretty good. And Roger had stayed in the Army Reserve, Officers Reserve. And so, of course, he was called back. Well, he thought I ought to take those 2 children, small children, and follow him around to Army camp. I didn't think so. So I just stayed there and kept things going, which was a blessing that I did, I feel. Because once you destroy something that you start, then you may never get it started again. And it's worked out just beautifully, not only for us, but for my family, John and his wife that live out there now and raise cattle and horses and everything, and all the grandchildren enjoy it and so.
How many acres on the ranch?
I believe there are about 1,500 now.
And how many head of cattle were you running?
Well, when he was gone, he's running about 50.
Okay.
But now don't have too much land. It's dry down there right now, and but he has about 150 now.
Okay. And your kids would have been pretty small at the time?
Oh yeah. John was about 4, and Judy was about 2. Yeah, very small.
So did you hire on help, or did you do?
No, well, a little
most
bit
of
of
it?
a help. There was a boy that had just returned from Army duty, a neighbor boy, and he would come up and we'd go feed every morning and everything. And it wasn't so much to do that we couldn't get it done.
Mm-hmm. Because that's no small thing, trying to get the ranch started and
Yeah.
having all those responsibilities and the kids at the same time.
So now, that if I hadn't have grown up on a ranch, I would never had anything, the clue what to do,
Mm-hmm.
But it certainly did help me know a little bit about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you said your husband was from Tulsa,
Yeah,
so
he
he
didn't know-
probably
no.
wasn't a
He wasn't a
farmer
cowboy.
ranch kid. Yeah.
He was a spit and whittle.
Now, I understand you taught school for many years.
Yeah,
What
30.
can you tell me about that?
Well, I taught vocational home economics there in Davis for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Then Roger and I divorced after 30 years of married life. And I felt like the attorney gave me the lion's share of everything. I mean, he really helped me out. And so then, by the time I wanted to go back the next year, they had hired a homemaking teacher. So I went into 5th grade science and thoroughly enjoyed it. And taught for 10 years till I retired.
Mm-hmm. So you were out of the Davis school system the whole time?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was out for 2 or 3 years, and the principal of the middle school called me and said, Dorothy, could you come back just 2 periods in the day, the first 2 periods of the morning, and teach middle school science and do whatever you want to do. The first class will be 8th grade girls and the next is 6th grade boys. Well, that was fun, did my own curriculum, and we kind of did mini home economic stuff, and we sewed on buttons, and we did cooking stuff, and we did breakfast foods, and this one boy, he was a twin. I never had his other twin brother,
Never had the
but I
other
had him, but Jeremy. And so we practiced doing a lot of different breakfast foods, and then we drew to see how well they remembered what they were supposed to do and how to do it. And he drew making French toast in the waffle iron, and he loved it so. He told me the other day, not the other day, about he graduated from Manhattan, Kansas this spring, and he said, I'm still making French toast in the waffle iron.
That's not a bad idea.
Yeah, it makes it nice and crisp and
Mhm.
everything.
We'll have to try that.
Yeah,
We'll have to think of Jeremy when we
yeah,
do.
right.
Well, what can you tell me about how you feel the field of home economics changed over the years?
I wish you hadn't asked me that.
Oh, okay. Well, I can take it back if you want.
Well, I tell you what, I felt like when I was teaching, I taught things that helped me, the girls, the most, as a thing. So that's what they got. And so much of the stuff is not applicable to everyday living. It is maybe I'm living behind times. I don't know. But if it is, I still think they need to learn how to sew on a button, do this and that, alter clothes to fit. Even though you don't wash and iron everything you have now, it's still, you need to know that. And there are just so many things. And while I was teaching, we did built a new home economics department. And we put in one of these beds that folded up in the wall and double doors, I forgot what they call them.
Murphy beds?
Murphy bed,
Mhm.
yeah. And so, because I had been taking a twin bed I had to teach home nursing. How can you teach a patient in bed if you don't put them to bed? Well, anyway, I did that, and the kids learned a lot in home nursing, just simple thing. But one of the girls said, well, I'll never take care of anybody that's sick in bed. I'll either put them in a nursing home or in a hospital. And I said, well, now wait a minute. But later, after I was out of teaching home economics, and I was on the school board, and I went back to an open house one night, and the new superintendent was there, and I said, have you been to the home economics department? He said, no. I said, well, let's go over there and I'll show it to you. Well, lo and behold, they had taken that bed out and put shelves in. I don't know what they did with the bed. I said something about it. She said, well, we never did use it. Oh my. But anyway, that, and then they turned it into, they took the washer and dryer out, the dishwasher, all of that stuff, and turned it into a music room. They just really do. But I think the superintendent we have now is thinking about how important it is for them to come back and have home economics.
Now, I know when I was in 8th grade, both boys and girls had to take half a year of shop and half a year of home ec. Did they do that where
No.
you were, or did
No,
you have
they-
groups of boys?
The only way we did that was not half, but for 2 weeks I would take the ag boys and he would take my girls, you know. And but that's a good idea. Girls need to know how to use a screwdriver and a hammer and all of that, you know.
Well, and I was going to say, you know, having grown up on a farm, I knew the screwdrivers and the hammers, but the it was the woodworking equipment with the, you know, the lathe and things like that used to scare me.
Right.
But I learned how to use them.
Yeah.
So, well, how do you think the students changed over the years? I mean, you were there for a long time. Did you see any trends?
I can see it change now, but I tell you what makes me feel good is when I go into a store, I may not recognize this person because they're maybe bald-headed or gray-headed or something. They'll say, oh, Mrs. Jameson, how are you? And come up and give me a hug. You know, that's showing self-respect for a teacher. You don't see that done very much anymore to them. I don't know what it is. But everything is changing, and I don't know if we don't handle the drug situation better than we are. We're still going to be in it. And sex has gone rampant. It just, you can't even listen to a TV program anymore that isn't something about somebody exposing themselves or something.
Well, now, I understand you've been really active in the community, too, in different organizations.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about some of the things you've been involved with?
Well, yes, I've been very active in my church, and it's the First Christian Church, Disciples of Christ in Sulphur.
Okay.
And then when I first came to Sulphur, I was a Girl Scout leader. And then I have served on the Soil Conservation Board and have received a plaque. Several years ago I signed up for a 5-year program and outlined what I wanted to get done. It's in 5 years. And I got it done, and they gave me a nice plaque as a Woman of the Year, you know.
Ah, excellent.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
So, and just, I got the Outstanding Teacher of the Year for Murray County, and just things like that. So,
That made the Boys City newspaper.
huh?
That made the Boys City
Oh, did
newspaper
it?
when you were Teacher of the Year.
Teacher of the Year?
Mm.
Good.
I found that when I was looking online.
Oh.
I guess to just end up everything where we started, back on the Strong Ranch.
Okay.
Is the ranch still in the family?
Yes.
Mhm.
Now, of course, my parents have died. And so anyway, and both of my brothers are gone. But my oldest brother's oldest daughter, in her family, had moved out there on it. Her mother is now in a hospital. But anyway, they are running the ranch and doing real well. If it just rained.
Yeah.
And needed that. But they have a house in town that's a 4-bedroom house that eventually moved out down from Colorado Springs. They got that house, the kids were still in school and all, and they needed it. Now she has turned that into the Branding Iron Bread and Breakfast. And that is the neatest place if you're ever going to stay in Boise City. Stay at the Branding Iron. I had some good friends in my church, and the one that moved the dairy herd from up by Lake
Oh, Arcadia?
Arcadia down to David, to Sulphur. And he'd never been in that area. So last fall we went on a little trip. We went up there, we stayed there, and then we went on up to Black Mesa and up to Kenton. Now Kenton is the only town in the state of Oklahoma on mountain time. But we saw the dinosaur tracks and all of that. And they had traveled a lot in the Holy Land, and they were so amazed at how much the rock formations and the trees and everything in that area of the Panhandle looked like what they saw around Jerusalem and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's high and it's dry.
Yeah,
I guess.
Yeah.
But it's a beautiful area.
Yeah.
I was impressed. I was impressed when I was out
We
there.
were kind of surprised when some of the people in Boise City have bought a retirement home in Kenton. Well, I guess you could really retire out there if you didn't have anything to do.
Well, are there any things that we didn't talk about that you wanted to touch on, or?
Oh, probably tomorrow I'll think a lot of things. But
Okay.
Right now, I just don't,
Well,
think
if you
about-
do, we can finish up. We can do a little more of an interview later on.
Okay.
But thank you so much for your time and for talking with us
Yeah.
and giving us your stories.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, John and Kathy, that's my oldest son and his wife, are promoters here at Oklahoma State. They're pretty good donors, and they're in the Alumni Association and all of this and that and so forth. So they will probably be giving you tips or something.
Well, we'll see what they've got to say.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you so much, and we really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for going to the trouble to come down here and
Oh,
see me. Well,
it's
I've
our
got a bad
pleasure.
leg.
Our pleasure. So glad it's feeling better.
Yeah.